This is Simpleeze Fantasy Football.
What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is Simpleeze Fantasy Football, where we help make your fantasy football season simple and easy to come out with a dub. So today, first of all, before we do anything, I want you to make sure you hit that like button, that notification button, and ring that bell, because we're going to be coming out with more content here, and we're just getting started. So welcome to the channel. Hope you guys are along the ride with me. So today we're going to be talking about the top mistakes I see fantasy managers making going into the year that could totally change the complexion of your season before it even begins. So, got my iced tea? Let's get into it. So the first mistake that I see these teams making is not paying attention to coaching shifts, because it totally will shift the paradigm going into the season for some of these fantasy players. For example, last year, DeAndre Swift, he was a player that was kind of coming off of a limp season where he was getting injured, and he was still high up on people's radar, but he wasn't ranked as high as some of these other running backs. I wanted Swift on all of my rosters just because Anthony Lynn, the guy who came over from LA to Detroit, I knew was going to be calling the plays for the Detroit Lions. Now, why does that matter? Well, if you look at the structure of which Anthony Lynn was run his offense, it was very running back centric. So what I mean by that is there are a lot of plays that were called or designed for the running back to catch little bubble screens outside of just the regular rushing that they already got. So let me tell you right now, DeAndre Swift, through the first 8 games, he didn't have a single game where he caught less than 4 passes. And even in a standard league, a half-point PPR or a PPR league, I mean, that's huge. Guys catching balls out of the backfield, I mean, he had games where he caught 7, 8 passes. That's a wide receiver. You're hoping that for your wide receivers, and plus you're getting the rushing upside of DeAndre Swift. Guys like that, if you know going into the year that a coach is going to have their focus around a certain player or a certain dynamic, then take advantage of it. Target those players. Trade for those players if you're in a dynasty league or if you're in a keeper league. Do something, but don't just know that they're doing that and then have to pay more for them later if you want to watch them succeed. So that's the first mistake I see everybody's making, is not paying attention to coaching, whether it's head coaching or coordinators that will impact the game for these fantasy players. The second big thing that I see right after the season's up, or even during the postseason, if you're in one of these dynasty leagues or a league where you can trade players post-season, a lot of these guys will watch these postseason games and they will pay a premium for guys that show out in the postseason because they're hoping that production will carry over until the next year. I'll give you an example of a guy that really produced really well in the postseason and was a guy that people really liked because of it, Raheem Mostert. And he was kind of an injury-prone guy, but he was also a guy that you had one of those games, had I think a 200-yard rushing game in the postseason, and was just, stomping all over everybody in the postseason a few years ago. And then the next year, everyone got burnt. He when he was on the field, he did okay, but he wasn't like a guy that was going to win you your league, and you probably paid more than what he was really worth because of the price tag going up because of what he did in the postseason game. So you got to be careful with those guys. And there's a guy like a Gabriel Davis this year. You're not going to want to touch a guy like Gabriel Davis coming off a 200-yard performance, because everyone's going to see his potential and say, what have you done for me lately? Look at his production in that short amount of time and want the biggest bang for the buck they can get out of him. And people like that you want to stay away from. So Gabriel Davis might be great next year, but I'm not going to touch him right now coming off that 200-yard performance, because he's going to be worth way more for the guy that has him than I'm willing to give up. So that's the number 2 thing I think fantasy managers do, is they pay too much for guys that show up in the postseason. The third thing that I see that fantasy managers don't do well is not taking advantage of the injuries, which kind of sounds bad, but taking advantage of the injuries or the somewhat down years for players because of their circumstances or what happened to them. So I'll give you an example. At the beginning of the year, you probably could have bought Cam Akers at an all-time low in a dynasty league, and yeah, you might have had to get out something, worth something to get him. But because of the question marks, the uncertainty about it's an Achilles injury, I don't know what he's going to be like. I don't know how long he's going to be out for. You get all these big question marks, and sometimes you're taking a risk, but you at least know that the caliber player that you could possibly get in return is going to outweigh the risks that you're really taking in one of these leagues. So, even if you decide I have an injured Cam Akers and I want to trade him, the farther he gets along and the more good reports come out about his progress, guys like that, you're always looking at the positive. But if you get him right on the precipice of the negative impact that he had on your fantasy season or on someone else's fantasy season, you can really buy him for cheap. Or a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster, like he barely played this year because of the shoulder injury. People have not seen him play in a while. The last time they saw him play with an out of shape Ben Roethlisberger, and guys like that you could buy for an absolutely low price before they come out with news like I think Juju's going to go to the Chiefs. He came out and straight up said he wants to go to the Chiefs. Before any of that actually comes to fruition, buying guys like that for cheaper after not seeing them play for a while is definitely beneficial for your fantasy season. So that's the third thing that I see that fantasy managers don't do a good enough job at doing. The fourth thing is worrying too much about your depth. When you have a handful of players coming out of a draft, sometimes you can make deals look very, very enticing. But as you and I both know, there's only a certain amount of roster spots that are worth filling. And what I mean by that is I'm not saying that you don't ever have to worry about injuries or you don't ever have to worry about having enough guys to fill your roster. But what I am saying is every week there's only a certain amount of players that you can play. When you are worried about having a good wide receiver 2 on your bench as a backup plan instead of trading him and another wide receiver 2 for potential wide receiver 1, it's almost a no-brainer to me that you would take the better player in return, because more often than not, it's unlikely for you to have to play the lower tier player if he's sitting on your bench than it is for you to be able to plug and play this same guy every single week. So my advice would be to try and package these players. Even if you got to package 2 or 3 guys for a really stud guy, do that as long as you have enough pieces to fill your roster, obviously, and you're not going to be playing like a guy you have to pick up off the waiver wire every week. But do that and see what team gets you. Because I mean, in my other league, I wound up with like Jonathan Taylor and Keenan Allen, and I had Saquon, which I wound up trading him. And I just had a handful of guys in one of my leagues, and because you can just keep stacking players the more that you just trade your depth, especially off of the backs of a good performance for some of your depth pieces. I feel like that is the best way to do it is to just trade for the surefire guys you know are going to be week in and week out plug and play guys that you don't even have to worry about the roster. So that's what I would do if I were you, is always when you're trading, try to get the best player in the deal. So the fifth thing that they do, which kind of piggybacks off of what I was just talking about, is a lot of fantasy managers, they will stay stagnant in what they're doing. What I mean by that is they won't scour the waiver wire for good deals or running back handcuff to the running back handcuff and stash players in a deeper league, or they won't be looking for deals, like I said, in trading for players that are kind of had a couple bad weeks to start the season, or had some bad news and people are very dim and bleak on their situation. Like right now, there's a big question mark surrounding a guy like Calvin Ridley. You don't know what he's going to do, if he's going to play, what his mental health state is, and I hope he feels better, and I hope he gets better, but we don't know what's going on with him. And sometimes you can use that information to say, I'm going to barter with this kind of trump card I have because he didn't play. We don't know what he's going to play, and I'll offer you this, this, and this. If you give me this, this, and this, and if the guy that you're seeking for is Calvin Ridley, go get him. Go get a guy like that, because next year he could be a boom player for you. He could win you a league. He could be a guy that you could get for a lot cheaper than what you would have got him before at the beginning of this year. But don't stay whatever you do not stay stagnant in your leagues, because that will just cause you to fall behind and to allow other guys to take advantage of these same situations that you could have yourself taken advantage of. Very last thing that I think a lot of people make a mistake on is listening to other people's opinions and taking that to the bank rather than formulating your own opinion on a player or on a draft class, for instance. So this year, the 2022 draft class, a lot of people are comparing it to the David Montgomery, Josh Jacobs draft class, where there's not any home run hitters, but there are some guys that people would want and people are going to be able to draft and have viable fantasy production from. But the problem is when you start hearing that and you start listening to other people say, well, the top guys aren't necessarily as, I don't know how you say, high ceiling as the next guys. That is when you pretty much turn off your vision to anybody being good in a draft class. I mean, there are guys that most people wouldn't even looked at. You look at some of the top prospects and you say, wow, this guy's really good, like a Najee Harris from last year, or Jamar Chase or whatever. And some people only go to the surface level. Well, you're really doing yourself a disservice, because I'll just give you a couple examples of guys that went outside of the top 5 in my own personal dynasty leagues that wind up being just these are going to be great players for years to come in fantasy leagues. So you got guys like Justin Jefferson. He was probably the 4th receiver taken in my draft that year, and he is probably the best receiver out of the whole bunch that came out of that year. He has shown time and time again that he has the ability to do it, separate himself from the next guy, and I think he's got the record now for the most yards through the first 2 seasons of any player in NFL history. So guys like that, and he wasn't even one of the top picks coming out of the draft for these dynasty guys. So Justin Jefferson, you got guys like Elijah Mitchell, who was a 6th-round draft pick who no one really could see coming, but if you watched his tape and you thought he was good and went to a decent situation like the 49ers, I mean, you could take a late-round flyer on him. He was a 3rd-round draft pick in my 14-man league, so he was probably the 35th or 36th pick in my league, and no one really knew who he was until he overtook Trey Sermon and took over the running back 1 spot in San Francisco. So guys like that, or even Amon-Ra St. Brown this last year, a 4th-round pick. He went way too far down to the draft, and people were kind of writing him off because no one had spent the draft capital on him, but the Lions knew they found their guy, and they started integrating him more and more into the offense as the season went on. I think he had 2 or 3 games towards the end of the year where he had over 100 yards consecutively, and he just tore it up. So guys like that, I mean, even Antonio Gibson was a 2nd-round draft pick in my Dynasty League the year he came out. So guys like these are just, they're guys that you don't have to pay very much for. You just have to pay attention. You just have to see what other people aren't looking for and go forth. And this is how you win your league, is just by doing things other people aren't doing. And all these things are going to give you a leg up. And if you just can do those things, I mean, year in and year out, you're going to be in your postseason. You're going to be rocking it, and you're going to have everyone in your league saying, why is it every year you seem to have one of the best teams? It's simple, it's easy, and people are wondering year in and year out why you have one of the best teams. Just say, I don't know, man, I guess I keep getting lucky. So, that's all for this episode, guys. Just please don't forget to subscribe, squeeze that like button, and ring that bell, and thanks for watching, and hope to see you on the next one.